Well, the first time I attempted to share the gospel was at evangelism conference with a youth group during my senior year of high school. I wasn't actually successful in doing it, and I came very close to throwing up. And then as for the first time I've shared the gospel, it's not something I really totally remember. I remember a few just other first times of sharing the gospel, but none particularly stick out, as it's just kind of been a slow progression and development of strengthening my abilities to share the gospel. Those times that I've shared the gospel have been scary, but also really rewarding. And though not all of them have borne fruit immediately, it's really just kind of been a blessing to see my development through that. Yes, we should share the gospel. The last commandment Jesus left us was in Matthew 28:19-20 in the Great Commission. He says, "Therefore go and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit, teaching them to obey everything that I've commanded you. Look, I myself will be with you every day until the end of this present age." So given that Jesus tells us to, we ought to share the gospel. With respect and humility, I think that a lot of times, at least in my experiences of learning how to share the gospel, a lot of people try to use illustrations like the bridge illustration or the circle method or all these different kinds of all these equations, all these steps that we ought to take to share the gospel. But I think the best way probably to share the gospel is through prayer, and by praying for opportunities to share the gospel and for wisdom when those opportunities arise. I find that all the times I've attempted to share the gospel without first proceeding and praying have not gone well, and if they've happened at all. But I found that when I pray for opportunities to share the gospel, that God gives me those opportunities. When I pray for wisdom, the Spirit grants me wisdom. That one's a little harder to answer, but when the Spirit leads us to share the gospel, we ought to share the gospel. And if you don't feel led to share the gospel by the Spirit, then you should consider praying about that and praying for that conviction, because sharing the gospel, it doesn't have to be just like, raw evangelism or anything, but sharing the gospel is an important thing we ought to do and are called to do as Christians to spread the glory of God and His kingdom and His works. Sharing the gospel it's something that still scares me. I'm pretty prone to anxiety, and in the past I've been far more prone to anxiety, but God has been faithful and has allowed me to work through much of that. And though it's still scary, I've been able to find the value in it and see how important it is to share the gospel and to just glorify God in that, to try to make disciples of men. Another important thing is that sharing the gospel is in and of itself important, but in the Great Commission, as I read earlier, talks not only about making disciples of all nations and baptizing them in the names of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, but it also entails teaching them. Now, what does it say exactly? It says, teaching them to obey everything that I've commanded you. So it's not just sharing the gospel and making disciples is not just in this sharing of the gospel, but of equipping those that we share the gospel with, or other new or younger believers to just come to know God and the gospel, that we might be able to further understanding of truth, and that they might also be able to become witnesses for Christ and to glorify Him in all things that they do. Just expand His kingdom in that way. So